Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're excited to start our session about equity in action, opportunity, and accountability through Equity NYC. Let's do intros. We're from the Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity. I'm Bermet Kidikova, and I'm a technical product manager in the product team.
Hello, my name is Pavel Ilyin. I'm a software engineer at the product team.
And hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Una Jordan. I'm a product specialist with the product team at the Mayor's Office for Economic Opportunity.
Today, we will walk you through an overview of our office, share the core principles of Equity NYC, talk about the digital tool, do a demo, and lastly, we will finish off with Q&A. As we go through the slides, feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat, which we will cover at the end of the presentation. A brief summary of who we are and what we do. Our office uses evidence and innovation to reduce poverty and increase equity. We manage a discrete fund to design, test, and oversee new programs and digital products, evaluate anti-poverty approaches, facilitate data integration across agencies, and produce research and analysis of poverty and social conditions. Within the NYC opportunity, our digital product team oversees the development of public-facing web applications like Access NYC, Equity NYC, Jobs NYC for both job seekers and employers, Workforce Data Portal, and many other products. We conduct user research, create user experiences, and work closely with internal and outside technology teams to prototype, develop, and set ongoing strategy for these digital services. A brief history of our project. Equity NYC traces its roots back over 30 years, when language was added to the charter, requiring the mayor to submit an annual report on well-being to the city council. There was a lapse in this reporting for some period, but in 2016, NYC Opportunity published the report, bringing the city back into compliance. This report, known as the Social Indicator Report, took the form of a digitally accessible PDF on NICO's website, and there was a limited run of physical copies. In 2017, our office issued an updated version of the report with guidance from Local Law 177, which expanded data disaggregation requirements. In 2019, executive order was passed, which further mandated and expanded the report. We released the final PDF version, now called the Social Indicators and Equity Report. Between 2019 and 2021, we worked to navigate and fulfill the requirements outlined in EO 45, ultimately leading to the launch of the Equity NYC website in early 2021. This updated version incorporated both outcomes data inherited from the report and 5 citywide equity metrics. Executive order expanded the annual reporting of the Social Indicator Report and required our office to continue reporting the well-being data from the Social Indicators Report. At the time EO 45 was passed, there were 45 outcome indicators. Second, report 5 new citywide equity metrics from each agency and office with disaggregation by race, ethnicity, gender, income, and sexual orientation where applicable and available. These metrics included residents served, city service locations, hiring and employment diversity by agency, and MWBE usage by agency, as well as description of internal equity practices. And third, provide guidance to agencies on identifying best practices with equity and opportunities to apply those within the agency, as well as conducting equity-informed performance management to ensure the city's work reduces disparity and empowers historically marginalized communities. After EO 45 was passed, we spent a lot of time brainstorming and deliberating on how we were going to meet the mandate. An idea that emerged really early was that we wanted to build something digital, which led us to the creation of the digital product we have today, Equity NYC. This website reports the status of racial and social equity in New York City and the city's work to address disparities. Equity NYC now includes 237 indicators and 130 maps sourced from 59 city agencies. When we started thinking about the digital product, we wanted to create a vision for what the site's mission should be and co-created this mission statement. Equity NYC builds local government capacity to increase racial and social equity by providing New York City agencies and offices with the community, digital and data tools, institutional expertise, and material resources necessary to achieve better outcomes for all New Yorkers now and for generations to come.
In open source, we trust indeed. Our team and office strive toward utilizing as much open source tools as possible, because why waste taxpayers' money, right? Well, I'm glad you agree. Now let's cover main components of Equity NYC. On infrastructure side, application hosted on Amazon Cloud or AWS. EC2 is a virtual server, and it's where main compute is happening. There we have a web server that take requests from the internet and do something with it. RDS is where database lives, and S3 bucket is hosting assets like images, videos, but most importantly, it hosting front-end build. On the backend, on EC2 server, we spin up Docker container that has Django application running in it. Django, it's a Python MVC framework, and it serves in two capacities. First, it's an API that serves data from the front end for the front end, and second is CMS that allow non-tech people to work with database. And on RDS, we host in Postgres database that Django getting data from. Frontend built with React.js. It's a JavaScript library of the framework, depends of your choice of terminology. UI that you can see in a browser, that's React.js. And its builds coming from S3 bucket when you access equitynyc.gov. Since we're talking about data products, we cannot avoid subject of data visualization. We have regular format visualization that transform information into visual forms like charts and graphs. For that, we use HighChart library. And our Jewel is a virtual visual representation of spatial data on a map. For that, we use Carto. It renders as a blank map of the city, as well allow us to add and combine layers of visualization on that map.
I'm going to do an overview of what we have on the site, and then I'm going to talk about applications before we get into the demo. So to just give a quick overview of the data that we have on the site, we currently have 81 equity outcomes. So those are the measures of well-being that Burnett described earlier from the social indicators report. You might have remembered that she said there were 45 at the time when we were making the PDF report. We now have 81 of these equity outcomes since we launched the site. So we had a really big expansion in the past few years of this data set. We currently have 112 city service metrics. So these were required by EO45. And so these are a data set that we've grown since we've launched the website. And these metrics describe who the city serves with its programs and its services. 86 of those outcomes and city service metrics, we have neighborhood level data for. So we'll talk more about the neighborhood level data in just a bit. And we have 35 service locations data sets showing the point location of various city services and resources. And all in all, we have data from over 50 New York City offices and agencies hosted on the site. So when we talk about data on Equity NYC, and particularly in terms of how it's displayed on the website, we tend to sort it into two different buckets, which is the person level data and our mapped data. And so our person level data shows data by demographic and socioeconomic groups. And the data sets that we have person level data for are the equity outcomes and the city service metrics. You can see an example on the right-hand side of the screen of what these metrics look like on Equity NYC. They tend to be bar charts and line graphs depending on what level of disaggregation you're looking at. And also one thing I want to note is, since we have a lot of indicators that we've been collecting person level data for a really long time, person level data is what we collected and reported as part of the social indicators report. There are a number of indicators for which we have 10 plus years of data, and this is one example. But our person level data tends to be disaggregated by borough, race, ethnicity, gender, income, and sexual orientation, where those are available, as required by EO45 and LL174. Not every indicator will have that much disaggregation. Oftentimes they don't, just because of data availability and what is collected and reported. But other times we also have disaggregation that is outside of those five categories based on what the indicator is showing and measuring and what is important relative to the indicator's content. And then we have our mapped data. Our mapped data is hosted on Mapping Equity, which is our tool within a tool that we launched in the summer of 2022. So through Mapping Equity, you can view and compare data sets on a neighborhood level. So we have four what we call base maps, but they are, I guess, just data sets on Mapping Equity. And those are equity outcomes. So those equity outcomes that have geographic data, city service metrics, so those metrics of participation, and city services that have geographic data. And then we have two unique maps to Mapping Equity, or two unique data sets that are unique to Mapping Equity, which are city service locations, so those point locations of city services, and population. And this is information that comes from the census. So you can add layers with demographic and socioeconomic groups on top of any other data. And so I guess I kind of buried the lead there. A huge feature of Equity NYC is that you can layer two data sets on top of each other. So you can see that here on the right-hand side. This is an example of a layered data set with residential evictions and then tenant support unit outreach attempts, which is a program of the city to help keep people stay in their homes. So this is an example of what that map could look like if you layered two data sets. And we'll get into this more in just a bit, and especially once we get into the demo. So before we get into applications, just a few caveats. And these are caveats whenever you're using Equity NYC, but they're also caveats just in terms of quantitative data being used for decision making. So the first is that privilege shapes priorities, narrative, ownership, notions of validity, access, and authorship. The second, which is a huge thing for Equity NYC since we collect and report so much demographic information, is that people's identities and experiences do not fit into neat categories. So by its nature, demographic data is imperfect. And so that is just an important thing to keep in mind whenever using Equity NYC or any other disaggregated data. Third is numbers are an incomplete picture. I'm sure we've heard some version of this before, but it's nonetheless important to keep in mind that you need to balance quantitative data with qualitative data. Quantitative data can only measure how much, but it does not measure the how. And fourth is that data visualizations can be misleading. It's always important to validate what you're seeing in the visualization by going to the raw data. One thing I'll say is all the data on Equity NYC can be downloaded, so you can do that validation yourself. But it's always important to make sure that any visualization is accurately reflecting what is in the data itself. And so with that being said, let's get into a few of the core principles underpinning Equity NYC and also underpinning any kind of equity-informed decision-making or data-based equity-informed decision-making. And so three core principles we're going to quickly run through are equality, equity, and justice. I'm sure we have all heard these terms being used a lot, and we're just going to quickly go through and say what they mean in this context and also in the data context. So with equality, when we're thinking about equality, I think a core question is, are we giving everyone the same thing right now? So this is about equal access. This is about the same thing. And so I included an example on the right-hand side. This is from our service locations map showing the locations of public libraries across New York City. So I just cropped it just to show Brooklyn, since I think this is a fairly good example of equal distribution of these locations throughout this geographic area. So this is, I mean, I'm sure we could dig in and we can get into it, but I think it's a fairly good example, at least on the surface level of like equal access. And so I think that leads us into equity, which is the name of the site. It's a word that we have seen used a lot, and it's also a word that we have seen used in comparison with equality often. So with equity, we're talking about investing according to need. I'm sure a lot of us have actually seen that little cartoon with the kids who are trying to watch the ball game and they're looking over the fence. And the example of equality is they're all standing on the same size box, but the shortest kid can't see. But then equity is when you give everybody a platform that is relative to their height so they can all see over the fence. So this is the same principle, but applied to data. So we're thinking about needs and gaps and how we can move resources around in order to meet those needs and those gaps. And so here on the right-hand side, I have an example, again, from Mapping Equity. This light green to dark green map is showing unemployment. The darker green is showing higher rates of unemployment. And then this light orange to dark purple map is a layer that is showing engagement with young people through a former Civic Engagement Commission program. It was a pilot program for their citywide participatory budgeting initiative that they rolled out recently. But this was from a few years ago where they engaged specifically with young people and asked them what they would like to see the city put its money towards. And so, oh, I'm so sorry. I completely said the wrong thing. The second layer is participants in a small business services program. We'll see that other program in the next slide. So this is people who are receiving job placements and promotions through a career services program through the Department of Small Business Services. And so this is a good example of equity because we would want to see the city engaging more people in these neighborhoods with higher levels of unemployment. And so seeing this darker purple being correlated with these areas of darker green is just showing that we're seeing this program be more active in these areas. And now we get to justice, which is, are we accounting for historic patterns of inequitable investment? So this is looking back, looking at history, and thinking about making those injustices right. And so this is the example that I started spouting off on. So apologies for the confusion, but the light green to dark green map is showing child poverty. And so this is poverty in the under 18 population. So darker green is higher rates of poverty in the under 18 population. And then this light orange to dark purple map that's layered on top is this young, this It's Our Money project was the name of it, where they were engaging young people and asking them what they would like the city to put their money towards. And so this is a good example of like what justice could look like in action, is hearing from people in communities, hearing from folks who have been marginalized, like how they would like the city to use its resources in a way to correct those past injustices. And so this is just one example of how Equity NYC can be used to think about justice. And so before we get into the demo, just to kind of give a really high level overview of how we see Equity NYC's applications. So up top, Equity NYC is best used for preliminary research and high level performance monitoring. In our experience and our recent experience especially, we have seen that Mapping Equity has the most actionable data, since our person level data is tied to demographic categories, whereas Mapping Equity is tied to location and neighborhood. It allows for folks to do easier resource allocation analyses and monitor things on a neighborhood level. And so we've also seen it for resources, but also for planning outreach to communities. And just one flag is that all of the data that we have on Equity NYC is reported by city agencies. So we might not have all of the data on our site for any specific use case. However, everything I said earlier, everything that's on the site can be downloaded. And with that, we're going to move into our demo of the site. So here we are on the homepage of Equity NYC. If you go to equity.nyc.gov, this is where you will land. This is our starting place. So I just want to point out in the top right corner here, we added a translate button this past summer in our latest redesign of the site. So you're able to translate the site. And then also we added this really big search bar here in the middle of our homepage. I saw there's a few returning users on the call. Welcome back. This is for you. We really wanted to put a search bar right in the middle of the homepage. We have so much information on the site, and it can be a little bit hard to get directly to what you're looking for. So the search bar is really great if you just want to type in a few terms and just see what pops up, but it's especially helpful for people who know exactly what they're looking for so they can get straight into that data. So I'll just show you how it works. It's a text match based on the indicator name or indicator definition. But say I type in employment here. Oops, I type it correctly. And you can see we get 3 hits. We get 2 city services, the Anti-Gun Violence Employment Program, the Summer Youth Employment Program. This is both participant data. And then we also get an equity outcome showing unemployment. So, however, I know that we have a lot of potentially new users or people who do not use the site that much, and I would encourage you to scroll down a little bit and navigate by our 8 domains. So we have 8 domains that we organize our data into, which are here. And this is a launch point for each of these domains. So if you clicked on any one of these, you would get straight to the data that is tagged to that domain. You can see here we have a little bit of leader text to give you a little preview of what kind of information you might see within that domain. But we're gonna return here, but I'm gonna keep scrolling. We also have a place to view all of the data in one place, which is where we'll go right after I get through the homepage. Then here we have a launch point for mapping equity. You can click into any of these 3 tiles and get straight into that base map. So we have equity outcomes, city service metrics, and city service locations. And down here we have equity stories, which is where we can do, I guess it's sort of like a blog. We do little write-ups on really innovative or interesting initiatives or programs that the city is doing to promote equity. And it's also where we do our annual write-up on the internal agency equity practices that we collect every year as part of EO 45. And then at the very bottom, we have a newsletter sign up. I'm going to just plug that very briefly. If you would like to get any updates when we update the site, when we add new data, if we launch new features, or if we're doing any big presentations such as this one, you will get an email from us. We promise we won't blow up your inbox. We'll probably like 3 emails a year max, if that, but just plugging that right here. It's at the bottom of the page if you'd like to sign up. But scrolling back up, I'm going to return to this area with the domain tiles and click here to explore all of our data. And so this is our all indicators page. And I'll just add one note. You can get here too by clicking explore the data in the top nav. You can select a domain here, and you can also go here to all indicators to get to this page. So here is our 8 domains again. I'm just going to show you what you can do from here. So if you click one of these carrots, you can see all of the data that is tagged to that domain. So I remember seeing a lot of people being interested in housing. This is all of our housing data. This is both our person level data and our mapped data. We can also go here to core infrastructure and the environment. These are our infrastructure and environmental indicators. So I saw a lot of people who are interested in transportation. Fortunately, don't have much on like the subway, but we do have things such as city bikes, bike lanes. We also have real-time passenger information signs. These, I think, for the buses. We have pedestrian intervals so that pedestrians can get a head start crossing the street. So this is a really good place to come if you do not know what you're looking for and you just want to understand what we have. This is like the best place to just see everything in one page. But to start, I'm going to take us to economic security and mobility, just so you can see what the domain page looks like. So here we have landed, we're in the economic and security domain. We have a short overview here giving a bit of a minor context for this domain in the equity space. And then if we scroll down, we have our equity outcomes that are tagged to economic security mobility and our city services. So you can expand and collapse these menus to see, and you can see we're on unemployment since that is highlighted here. This tile is highlighted. I'm going to quickly breeze past the graphs. We'll return to them. We also have key insights here at the bottom, which is just a write-up that we do based on what is happening in that domain. And then we also have equity strategies here, which are write-ups on what the city is doing in this space. So just to give you an example of what that looks like. But to talk about applications of Equity NYC, I know I said earlier it can be helpful for high-level research. One way that this could be used is for people who want to include statistics in things such as an RFP or like a policy problem statement, or who are making a funding request for a new program or initiative. And so for like some kind of scenario, we could say that we are a CBO, we're in the Bronx, we're trying to make a new workforce development program for our clients, and we're creating a funding request to one of our funders to get additional funding to support the launch of this new program. So you could come here if you wanted to include some information on needs and find some information on unemployment. So you could pull in citywide unemployment data. You could look at the historical context. We also have unemployment by borough, by race, ethnicity, by gender, by race, ethnicity, and gender. And we also have geographic information. So if you're operating, say, in a specific neighborhood, you could include the unemployment rate for your neighborhood. So that is just like one example of how Equity NYC could be used just for pulling out really high level data points. So from here, I'm going to go into mapping equity. So this is what mapping equity looks like. This is what it would also look like if you landed on an equity outcome or city services map. But since we came here from the unemployment page, we're landing on unemployment. So just to quickly orient you to how Equity NYC works, you could zoom in and out here. You could also download the data. We have district boundaries here, so we can add any of these. I can just show you what those look like. It's just a layer that goes on top of the data. And then also here, something that we added last year was this year in the legend. You can click this little caret next to the year and see different additional years of data for this indicator. And the map will change and update with, so let's just put in 2019. So this is updated with 2019 data now. And all of our indicators and our data is on this left-hand panel. This is kind of our action panel for using the map. So I'll just kind of go through another scenario and just show you how to use the map as we go through it. So let's say that I am working for the city. I'm working in a tenant support program. I am trying to help people stay in their homes. We can go here and go to housing and click eviction filings. We have, this is eviction filings that were made within the last year or were made within 2022. So we can hover here and see the values for all of these neighborhoods, the numbers of evictions that were filed in these neighborhoods for 2022. And say I want to see what the data looks like for my program relative to evictions being filed, I can click down here to measure to. I'm in the right base map, but I could go here to navigate to another one, but I want to go to city service metrics, and I'm going to open housing again as well. And then we can go to the tenant support unit outreach attempts. So this is a program you can hover to see the definition by hovering this little information icon. So this is a program where they do outreach to folks to help them stay in their homes by connecting them to anti-eviction supports and repair resources. So here we can see that these geographies are not a perfect match. So that's just one thing I will say with Equity NYC. We have a varying number of different geographies that we use for different indicators depending on what's available and what best displays the data. So here we have community district and zip code layered on top of each other. So they are by no means a perfect match for each other. But say I was interested in seeing how we were doing relative to evictions in central and eastern Brooklyn. We can see here that it does seem like engagement is happening where evictions are being filed at higher rates. So that's really encouraging. But we could also download this data and just get into the nitty-gritty to understand if there's any places where we should maybe be targeting more outreach. So just one more example, just so I can also just show off our other base maps. I'm going to go here into the Select a Map menu, and I am going to go to city service locations. And so when we get here, it's going to be very, very busy. We have a ton of city service locations and they all populate by default. So I'm just going to click and check off all. So just starting with a blank map, we can go here to education. We can go here to public safety. We don't use the domain organization for this part of the site since it just is not an even one-to-one. But just to show you how this works, I'm going to click after school just to show you these after school locations. And I just want to say that after school is a really big bucket. There's a lot of city programs that are considered after school programs. And so if you hover, you can see what kind of program is being represented by that location. So you saw that that's a Cornerstone program. This is Compass. This is a different kind of Compass program. This is New York City Public Schools after school. So this includes both information from the Department of Youth and Community Development, as well as the New York City Public School system. So after school is a really big bucket. And so just want to flag that for a lot of the services here. In addition, like public library shows the locations of NYPL, BPL, and QPL library locations. But just to kind of do our final little scenario, we've come up with a scenario where, say, like the city has created a new program for older adults who were born outside of the United States to just provide them with additional supports. So, like, say you are an outreach specialist working for NYC Aging and you want to go to older adult centers to sign people up for this program. So one way you could use mapping equity is you go here, we could click older adult centers. We can see the locations of those older adult centers managed by NYC Aging throughout the city. And then we can go here to measure two, and we can go to our population-based map, which has demographic data, but we also have some socioeconomic metrics as well. So I'm going to click foreign born. And so that adds this like light green to dark green layer underneath the map, showing the percent of foreign born New Yorkers in any CD. And so if I was this outreach specialist, I might want to target some outreach, at least for my initial round, to South Brooklyn, maybe look at these locations in Coney Island and in Bensonhurst, since this has a really high rate of people who are born outside of the United States. And with that, I know that was a lot of information. We're just going to move into our Q&A part of the presentation. If you haven't already answered question 4 on the poll, now that you've seen the site, we would love to hear about what kind of improvements we could make to make it more usable. But I also am here for we're here for people to come off mute, ask any questions. We're also totally able to go back into the site if there's anything you had a question about during the demo. And so, yeah.
There was a popular question about, is there any disaggregation by age?
I can answer that. We don't have age for every indicator. We do for a few indicators. It's not one of the required layers of disaggregation that we collect. There are a few programs that we feature that are for young people only, and so that is in its nature for a specific age range, but I can't quite remember. I think that there's a few, for example, our broadband access, I do believe we have age. I think for our poverty indicators, we have age. I do believe for the traffic fatality indicator, we also have age. That's just off the top of my head. There might be a couple more, but it is not one that we have across the board.
Thank you. Another question is, how frequently is it updated, the data? Just wanted to say we update the data annually every year during summer.
So this summer we will be releasing in most cases, for most indicators, 2023 data. You could see in the demo that like the data was a little bit stale, showing 2022. We will be updating this summer with 2023.
Can I ask, how does this data get interlaced with the mayor's management report, like the MMR?
That's a really good question. So our team has worked with the MMR's team in the past. I mean, they also have been really helpful for us when we just like stood up this project, since we do very kind of similar things where we're reaching out to folks and begging them for data every single year. So there have been some we've been in conversations. They have the equity statements now in the MMR, and they also do, I believe, link to Equity NYC on the digital, or sorry, the dynamic MMR, which is the new digital version of the MMR, which is really great. Plug if you have not checked it out. It is really, really a helpful tool. But Equity NYC is linked there, since I believe there are a few indicators on Equity NYC that also appear on the MMR. I don't have a list of those, but I do remember when we were starting Equity NYC and we were really looking to expand, we reviewed the MMR and we're pulling out various indicators within the MMR that we thought would be a good fit for Equity NYC. So there is some overlap and there is communication between our teams.
Phenomenal job. Such a interesting presentation, and I love maps. I think they're so powerful. My question is, for the next iteration of this tool, like what do you want it to do? Will there be different kinds of data? Like what's the next iteration look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's something that we're really thinking intentionally about. I think that the bigger hurdle for us to, go through right now is creating opportunities and understanding like how it's being used. I did see some people in the poll saying they had not heard of Equity NYC before this presentation, and so I think that is our current focus for the tool is helping people, like making sure people know about it, making sure people know how to use it, and then also making sure that we're creating some kind of and fostering a feedback loop where we can understand what our users are using the site for, and then understanding what kind of improvements or new features we should add in order to make it more usable. So I think this is a piece of that. I think bigger picture, I think we would just like to see this being used for particularly with city workers, but I think that there's also a lot of use cases outside of the city. And so I think we are waiting to hear from our audience on in terms of like what kind of new features we need to add to make it more applicable to their various use cases. But I think currently we're more focused on building out our data and building out our population data.
There's a lot of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'm seeing those as well. I think I can answer a couple of those. With regard to age not being a required level of data disaggregation, our data disaggregation requirements originally came from LL 174, which was a local law that was passed, I think, in 2017 or 18. That I can't remember exactly, but I believe it was race, ethnicity, gender, and maybe income. And so that really expanded our reporting, but EO 45, which is the mandate that Equity NYC very directly sprung from, requires race, ethnicity, gender, income, sexual orientation, and location, I believe.
I think the next question is about functionality. If we want to expand our website, I guess I can answer that one. We have been launching new features every year. So right now our focus is to make sure that the website works for people. So we will be doing lots of user testing and just refining our current features.
I'm also seeing about a data source question. Our data sources are either city agencies, their administrative data that they collect from program participants, or administrative data. I think, like, for example, the Department of Health does a few surveys, and so we have a few survey derived indicators from the Department of Health on the site. And then we also have census data that we pull and we calculate, as well as like a few other data sources, such as like the Department of Labor. So I think that our data sources, we get our data basically direct from the source. For example, like if it's agency data that is administrative data, we're getting that data directly from the agency that is collecting that information. For census, we're pulling that information directly from the census, etc. But of course, with all of our data submissions, we do review them very thoroughly. We do follow up with our agencies if there's anything that we didn't expect to see in the data. We also put the information into our development site just to see what it looks like in the graphs. And sometimes if we see like a trend going completely in a different direction than it had been for previous years, that's a follow-up point with agencies. So we do look very carefully at the information that we get, just to like make sure that there weren't any errors. I see a question about data availability. I hear that. This was a question about availability and timelines with understaffing and how we're working with agencies to improve that. So we actually just started our outreach process for getting that 2023 data into the site. And by and far, we've been working with the same folks for a number of years now. And I'm like really happy to say that we have not really experienced turnover in our main agency contacts. And so that is great for us in terms of like maintaining that knowledge base at the agencies. And so we have sometimes experienced time delays depending on when people leave, but that's also just, I think, an issue any year. But essentially we like work with agencies, and if they're not able to get us data by the time we update, we can also always update that data after the main launch of the new years of data. I think in terms of use cases, I think we kind of got at this before. I have a question in the chat about case studies or ways of using how you could use equity. So I think like I will say this is a newer focus for us. We were previously really focused on just getting it launched or just like expanding the data. And then last year we were really focused on this redesign and making the map easier to use, adding the search bar, adding translations, as well as just expanding our data. And I think now that we've kind of gotten the site to a place that we feel pretty good about, I think this is when we're trying to think about use cases and get a little bit spend more time on like showing people how to use the site and thinking of ways that it can be used. And I think very recently, as of I think last fall, we did a few sessions with some engagement offices, and we have seen a lot of interest and ideas and excitement from people who are in the outreach and engagement space, particularly with mapping equity, with thinking about how they can target outreach or send outreach teams or identify places for outreach. So that's one thing, and we don't have any kind of like formal write-up. That's just my opinion based on the general vibes I've felt in some calls with outreach specialists. But again, this is something we're hoping to build out our knowledge base on. Just thank you so much, everybody. If you want to get in touch with our team, you can email us at equity@cityhall.nyc.gov. And you're also, as Burmette put in the chat, very welcome to sign up for our newsletter.
Thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Noel. Thank you, Jazzy.